The air within the alien temple was unnaturally still, as though time itself had abandoned the space long ago. Elias Cordain stood at the threshold of the antechamber, his breath shallow, as his eyes adjusted to the faint greenish glow emanating from the walls. The light was not natural. It pulsed faintly like a heartbeat, casting shifting shadows that seemed to writhe of their own accord. He tightened his grip on his portable lamp, its beam doing little to dispel the murk. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint crunch of his boots on the temple's crystalline floor. He whispered a quiet curse to himself, half to test the weight of the quiet, half to steady his nerves. Stay focused, Elias, he thought, brushing a gloved hand across his forehead to wipe away sweat that wasn't entirely due to exertion. His team was 100 kilometers away, analyzing ruins much less imposing than this. He had wandered farther than planned, drawn by the tantalizing energy readings his scanner had picked up, readings that grew stronger with every step he took toward the temple's depths. It had been a ruin from afar, half buried in dunes of crimson sand, jagged spires jutting toward the alien sky like the ribs of some long-dead beast. Now, inside, the structure defied logic. The corridors were too perfect, the symmetry unnatural, almost maddening. It felt as though the temple was less a place and more a machine, a vast mechanism frozen mid-function. Ahead, the passageway opened into a cavernous hall, the ceilings disappearing into darkness. Intricate carvings adorned every visible surface, etched in patterns that hurt to follow for too long. Geometric shapes melted into alien figures, their postures regal yet alien, staring into eternity. Elias stopped at one particularly striking depiction, a figure larger than the others, standing at the center of a ring of kneeling shapes. The central figure was draped in what could only be described as living armor, its surface rippling with what appeared to be tendrils of energy. Its face, or what passed for it, was obscured by a jagged helm, but its eyes, twin pits of light, seemed to burn into him. Worship or warning? Elias murmured aloud, his voice swallowed almost immediately by the temple's void-like acoustics. He tilted his scanner upward toward the figure, noting the spike in energy. The readings were unstable now, the device flickering between coherence and gibberish. Something was interfering. He considered turning back, calling in the rest of the team, but the allure of discovery gnawed at him. He had spent years chasing scraps of alien relics, artifacts that were marvels in their own right, but spoke only in whispers of the civilizations that had left them behind. This temple, untouched by time and other human hands, felt different, compelling. He moved forward, the sound of his steps swallowed by the room's sheer vastness. At the hall's center stood a dais, and atop it, an oblong structure that gleamed faintly in the dim light. As he approached, his unease deepened. It was a sarcophagus. Not just any sarcophagus. This one appeared to be crafted of a material that shimmered like liquid caught mid-flow, its surface alive with faint shifting patterns. Symbols unlike any Elias had seen ran along its length, pulsating faintly, almost in rhythm with his own heartbeat. He circled the object, keeping a respectful distance. Every fiber of his being told him he was out of his depth, that this find was beyond even the most advanced understanding humanity had scraped together. But his curiosity was insatiable. "What are you hiding?" he whispered, lowering himself to inspect the symbols more closely. His glove brushed the surface, and the reaction was instantaneous. The pulse of light along the sarcophagus quickened, and the room around him seemed to hum with sudden energy. The carvings on the walls glowed brighter, the figures seeming to shift and writhe, their once static postures now alive with motion. Elias scrambled back, heart pounding, as the floor beneath him shuddered faintly. The sarcophagus began to open. It wasn't the mechanical hiss of hydraulics he expected, but a sound more organic, like the unfolding of petals or the exhale of a long-held breath. A crack of light appeared along its seams, bathing the chamber in an eerie brilliance. Elias shielded his eyes, his mind racing with equal parts fear and exhilaration. As the lid slid aside, a figure slowly emerged. At first, it was difficult to discern shape or form. The light radiating from the figure was blinding, her outline wavering like a mirage. Then, as the glow began to subside, he saw her. A woman, if the word could even apply. She was impossibly tall, her frame clad in armor that seemed less like clothing and more like an extension of herself. The material moved faintly, almost breathing, and the light within her eyes burned with a steady, unnatural intensity. She stepped forward, her movements precise, as though each one carried the weight of eons. Her gaze fell on Elias, and for a moment, there was only silence. Then, she spoke, her voice a low, resonant cadence that sent shivers down his spine. "Why?" she asked, her words laced with an alien accent but unmistakable in their intent. "Have you woken me?" Elias didn't answer. He couldn't. His mind scrambled to process the reality before him, the impossibility of what he was seeing. The silence stretched, her expression shifting from confusion to something darker. The temple around them seemed to respond, the hum rising in pitch, the shadows on the walls growing longer, sharper. "Answer me," she demanded, taking a step closer, her armored hand reaching for the hilt of a weapon at her side, a blade that seemed to shimmer as though it too was alive. Elias opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Before he could gather his words, the ground beneath them trembled violently. The temple roared to life, ancient mechanisms grinding and groaning, as if awakening from a long slumber. Somewhere deep in the structure, something massive began to move, and Elias realized, with a sinking certainty, that he hadn't just awakened her. He had awakened everything. Elias stumbled backward as the tremors rippled through the floor, the polished crystalline surface fracturing with thin, jagged lines that glowed an ominous red. The towering woman, her form illuminated by the ambient light radiating from her armor, stood immovable, her hand now fully grasping the hilt of the strange blade at her side. The weapon hissed as it came free, its edge shimmering with energy that distorted the air around it. She turned her blazing gaze toward Elias, her expression unreadable, a mask of something between rage and confusion. "You speak," she said, her voice a low resonance that reverberated through the vast chamber. "Your kind should not here." Elias found his voice, shaky though it was. I don't know what you mean. I didn't mean to wake you. I was—" "Enough." Her voice cracked like a whip, echoing off the walls. "You desecrate this place with your presence. Do you even know where you are? What you have done?" The temple groaned around them, and Elias felt a sickening lurch beneath his feet as the floor shifted subtly, the once smooth incline now tilting downward. The pulsing lights in the walls quickened, a staccato rhythm like an alarm. "Wait," Elias said, his hands raised. "I don't know what this place is, but whatever's happening, it's not just me. The temple, it's waking up." She tilted her head slightly, her burning eyes narrowing as though weighing his words. The blade in her hand emitted a faint hum, and the tendrils of energy coiling along its length grew brighter. "Your ignorance does not absolve you," she said. "But—" Her voice softened slightly, her gaze flickering toward the pulsing walls. "You are not wrong. This place stirs. I feel it." Without warning, she turned sharply and began striding toward the far end of the chamber, her movements fluid and precise. For a moment, Elias hesitated, unsure whether to follow or flee. His instincts screamed at him to turn and run, to put as much distance as possible between himself and this impossibly powerful figure. But the groaning of the temple grew louder, and the fractures in the floor began to widen, red light spilling out like molten lava. Whatever he had set into motion, there was no escaping it now. "Wait," he called, running to catch up. "What's happening? What do you mean this place is waking up?" She did not look back, but her voice carried over her shoulder. "You would not understand. This temple is not of your kind. It is a prison, a vault, and it has been breached." Her words sent a chill through Elias. A prison? For what? She stopped abruptly, spinning to face him. The blade in her hand pointed directly at his chest, the heat radiating from it making him instinctively step back. "For beings who should not walk among the living," she said, her tone heavy with finality, "including myself." Elias's mind raced. A prison. He had unleashed her, and perhaps worse. The idea that this place was a containment facility rather than a relic of some forgotten civilization shifted everything. His discovery was no longer a triumph, but a calamity. The woman, this warrior, seemed to read the turmoil in his expression. Her gaze softened, if only slightly. "I was sealed here to stop what you have now unleashed," she said. "But this place, it was never meant to open again." Elias exhaled shakily. "Then help me fix it," he said. "Help me stop it. If we don't—" "Silence!" she snapped, though her voice lacked the same venom as before. She turned away again, gesturing for him to follow. "If you value your life, you will obey and stay close." They moved quickly through the chamber, Elias struggling to keep up as the ground continued to tremble beneath them. The temple's shifting layout seemed almost alive, walls sliding open to reveal new passages, even as others collapsed into rubble. The sense of direction he had clung to earlier was gone, replaced by an unsettling awareness that they were being guided. By what, he didn't dare to guess. As they descended deeper into the temple, the air grew colder, the glow of the walls dimming until only the woman's armor and blade provided light. The oppressive silence of before was now replaced by distant rhythmic thuds, as though something massive was moving beneath them. "What are those sounds?" Elias asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The stirring of what should remain dormant," she replied. "The temple's defenses have failed, and now those imprisoned here will awaken." Elias's stomach churned. "Then why aren't we leaving? We should get out before—" "Fool," she interrupted. "There is no escape, not for me and not for you. The temple will not allow it." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He opened his mouth to argue, but before he could speak, they entered another vast chamber, this one filled with rows of monolithic structures identical to the sarcophagus she had emerged from. Each one pulsed faintly with light, the rhythm matching the thuds that reverberated through the air. The woman's expression hardened. "It has begun." Elias stepped closer to one of the sarcophagi, his curiosity overriding his fear. Inside, he could see the faint outline of a figure, its features obscured but unmistakably humanoid. "Who are they?" he asked. "They are the remnants of an empire that sought to conquer everything," she said, her voice bitter. "Warriors who swore allegiance to a tyrant. When their reign fell, they were locked away here to ensure they could not rise again." Elias's pulse quickened. "And you?" Her silence was answer enough. Suddenly, one of the sarcophagi hissed, a faint line of light appearing along its edge. Then another and another. The sound was followed by the low, guttural growl of something ancient and alive. Elias's breath caught in his throat. "What do we do?" She tightened her grip on her blade, the energy coiling along its surface growing brighter. "We fight, or we die." The first of the sarcophagi opened, and the thing inside stepped forward. The moment the first sarcophagus opened, the chamber descended into chaos. A figure emerged from within, its form obscured by an armor-like shell that glinted in the dim light. It moved unnaturally, its limbs bending at odd angles before snapping into place with an audible crack. Its face was hidden behind a helm of intricate design, though a pair of glowing eyes pierced the shadows with unsettling clarity. The air around it shimmered, as though the very space it occupied was unstable. The warrior woman tensed, raising her blade in a defensive stance. Her voice was low but firm. "Stay behind me. Do not speak. Do not draw their attention." Elias didn't need to be told twice. He pressed himself against the wall, heart hammering, as more sarcophagi began to open. The sound of hissing air and grinding mechanisms filled the room, each new figure stepping into the dim light with the same eerie precision. The first of the awakened warriors turned its gaze toward them. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Then it spoke, its voice guttural and distorted, like a chorus of voices layered atop one another. Arvikala, it intoned, the words alien, yet laced with a sense of finality. The woman beside Elias stiffened, her grip on the blade tightened, the energy coursing along its edge flaring brighter. "They recognize me," she said grimly. "What does that mean?" Elias hissed, his voice barely audible. She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped forward, her movements deliberate as though challenging the figure to act. The warrior tilted its head, the motion unsettlingly bird-like, before taking a single, thunderous step forward. The air between them crackled with energy. Then the woman moved. Her blade cut through the space between them, with a sound like tearing silk, its edge meeting the warrior's weapon, a jagged, pulsating construct that seemed to materialize from its arm. Sparks flew as the weapons collided, the impact sending shockwaves that rippled through the air. Elias could only watch, frozen, as the two clashed. The warrior's movements were mechanical, efficient, its strikes precise and unrelenting. But the woman fought with a fluidity that was almost hypnotic, her blade dancing in arcs of light as she deflected each blow. For a moment, it seemed she had the upper hand. With a deft maneuver, she disarmed the warrior, her blade slicing cleanly through its weapon. But before she could deliver the final blow, another figure lunged toward her from the shadows. "Behind you!" Elias shouted, his voice breaking the spell of silence. She spun just in time, her blade intercepting the second warrior's strike. The distraction, however, allowed the first to recover. The two moved in unison now, their attacks synchronized, forcing her to retreat. Elias's mind raced. He couldn't just stand there while she fought alone. He glanced around the chamber, searching for something, anything that could help. His eyes fell on the open sarcophagi, their glowing interiors lined with strange crystalline mechanisms. He darted toward the nearest one, his movements clumsy in the chaos. The controls were alien, their purpose inscrutable, but he recognized the telltale hum of energy. If he could disrupt whatever was powering them. As his fingers hovered over the glowing symbols, a hand clamped down on his shoulder. Elias spun, expecting another warrior, but found himself face to face with the woman. Her eyes blazed, her expression a mixture of fury and desperation. "Do not touch anything," she hissed. "You don't know what you're doing." "I'm trying to help," he shot back. "If I can shut them down, you'll do more harm than good." Her voice softened, but only slightly. "These systems are ancient and unstable. One wrong move, and you could wake all of them." The weight of her words sank in. Elias nodded, stepping back reluctantly. The warriors were regrouping, their movements more coordinated now. The woman turned to face them, her stance resolute. But Elias noticed something he hadn't before, a faint tremor in her movements, a slight hesitation in her strikes. She was tiring. A sudden deafening crack split the air, and the ground beneath them trembled violently. Elias stumbled, catching himself against the edge of the sarcophagus. The warriors froze, their glowing eyes turning upward as the chamber itself seemed to roar in protest. The woman's expression darkened. "The temple is collapsing," she said. "What? Why?" Elias asked, his voice rising in panic. "It knows it cannot contain them," she replied. "The failsafes are activating. This place will bury itself, and us with it, before it allows them to escape." Elias's stomach dropped. "We have to get out of here." She shook her head. "There is no escape. Not yet." "What do you mean, not yet?" Before she could answer, the floor beneath them gave way, and they were plunged into darkness. When Elias regained consciousness, he was lying on a cold metallic surface. The air was damp and heavy, filled with the faint hum of machinery. He groaned, sitting up slowly, his head pounding. The woman stood nearby, her blade resting at her side. She was staring at something, a massive console embedded in the wall, its surface covered in glowing symbols. Where are we?" Elias asked, his voice hoarse. She didn't look at him. Deeper within the temple, the collapse was directed. Directed? She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "This place has a will of its own. It brought us here for a reason." Elias frowned, his gaze shifting to the console. "What is this?" "A control node," she said. "The heart of the temple." As she spoke, the symbols on the console began to shift, rearranging themselves into a pattern that seemed almost familiar. Elias took a hesitant step closer, his breath catching as he realized what he was seeing. It's a star map," he said. The woman nodded. "A map to the prison's origin and its end." Elias's heart raced. This was no ordinary temple. It was a fragment of something much larger, a piece of a puzzle that spanned the galaxy. And now they were at its center. But the map also revealed something else, something that made his blood run cold. The prison wasn't just opening. It was transmitting to something beyond the stars. The star map glowed faintly, its intricate web of constellations and pathways shifting as though alive. Elias felt a lump form in his throat as he stared at the pulsing central node, a point of light that seemed to draw every thread toward it, an ominous beacon on an interstellar scale. "What is it transmitting to?" he asked, his voice unsteady. The warrior woman stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the map. The soft light illuminated her face, accentuating the hardened lines of her expression and the weariness hidden beneath her defiance. "To the remnants of their empire," she said quietly. "The call will awaken what remains. Their fleets, their soldiers, their God." "God?" Elias echoed, the word tasting bitter on his tongue. She glanced at him, her blazing eyes softened, if only slightly, by the weight of what she was about to say. "They worshipped a being beyond comprehension, a force of destruction that granted them power at the cost of their souls. When they were defeated, their empire was shattered, their God silenced. But the remnants still linger. This temple, it was designed to contain them and ensure their master never stirs again." Elias's mind spun. He had come here seeking knowledge, the glory of uncovering an ancient civilization. Instead, he had stumbled into the remains of a cosmic war, a conflict that had nearly destroyed everything. "And now I've woken them," he said bitterly. The warrior's gaze lingered on him, her expression unreadable. "You woke me," she corrected, "and in doing so, you may have given us a chance." "A chance for what?" Elias snapped, his frustration boiling over. "To stop an empire? To stop a god? I'm just a man with a journal and a camera. I'm not equipped for this." She stepped closer, her imposing presence somehow grounding. "You are here. That is enough." Elias opened his mouth to argue, but before he could speak, the chamber trembled. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, the map's central node flaring brighter. "The signal is accelerating," the woman said, her voice tense. "We don't have much time." Elias felt a surge of panic. "Then what do we do? How do we stop it?" She turned to the console, her hands brushing over the glowing symbols with an almost reverent familiarity. "The transmission can be blocked. The temple was built with failsafes to prevent this exact scenario. But—" her hesitation sent a chill down Elias's spine. "But what?" She exhaled slowly, her gaze hardening. "The failsafes require a catalyst, a sacrifice." The word hung heavy in the air. Elias's chest tightened. What kind of sacrifice? Her silence was answer enough. "No," he said, shaking his head. "No, there has to be another way." "There isn't," she said firmly. "This place is ancient, its mechanisms older than your understanding. To block the signal, the temple must consume a life force strong enough to power the disruption. A guardian's life force." Elias's throat went dry. "You mean you?" She nodded, her expression resolute. "I was created for this purpose. My life belongs to the prison. If this is the cost to stop them, so be it." For a moment, Elias was at a loss for words. He wanted to argue, to shout that it wasn't fair, that there had to be another way. but the look in her eyes stopped him, a quiet determination that left no room for doubt. "This is madness," he said finally. "You can't just throw your life away." "I am not alive in the way you are," she replied. "I am a construct, a weapon. My purpose is to ensure their master never rises again. If that means ending my existence, so be it." Elias clenched his fists, his mind racing. There had to be another way. He refused to believe that her only value was as a tool to be sacrificed. What if... He hesitated, the idea forming even as he spoke. "What if I was the catalyst?" Her eyes widened, a flicker of something, shock, perhaps even anger, crossing her face. "You don't understand what you're saying." "Maybe not," he admitted. "But if this place needs a life force to stop the transmission, then take mine. I'm the one who woke them. This is my fault." She stepped toward him, her expression fierce. "You would not survive the process. It would tear you apart, body and soul. You are not equipped for this." "And you are?" he shot back. "You're more than a weapon. I don't care what you were created for. You're alive. You think, you feel. That has to mean something." Her gaze faltered, the fiery intensity dimming for just a moment. "Elias." The sound of his name on her lips struck him like a physical blow. "I can't let you do this," he said quietly. "Not when there's another option." Before she could respond, the chamber trembled again, more violently this time. The map flickered, the transmission growing stronger. They were running out of time. "You don't understand what you're offering," she said, her voice softer now. "Then explain it to me," he said. "Make me understand." For a long moment, she said nothing, her gaze locked with his. Then, slowly, she lowered her blade. "If you truly wish to do this," she said, "you must be certain. There is no going back." "I'm certain," he said, though his voice trembled. "Tell me what to do." She turned to the console, her movements deliberate. "Place your hand here," she instructed, indicating a glowing symbol at the center. Elias hesitated only briefly before stepping forward. The surface was cold beneath his palm, the light intensifying as his skin made contact. The warrior placed her hand over his, her touch firm but not unkind. "Focus on what you are willing to give," she said. "The temple will do the rest." Elias closed his eyes, his mind swirling with fear, regret, and a strange sense of peace. As the chamber filled with light, he heard her voice one last time, low and steady. "Thank you." And then, everything went dark. Elias awoke to silence. For a moment he thought he was dead. The memories came rushing back, the glowing star map, the warrior's steady hand guiding his, and the blinding light that seemed to consume everything. But now, there was only stillness. He opened his eyes slowly. The chamber was no longer pulsing with alien energy. The star map had dimmed to a faint, residual glow. The air was heavy, but no longer thrumming with the weight of something vast and ancient. He sat up, wincing as a sharp pain shot through his body. His hands shook as he looked at them, half expecting to see burns or worse. But they were intact, though they felt different, lighter, almost insubstantial, as if something had been taken from him. Across the room she stood, the warrior woman, her form silhouetted against the faint glow of the map. Her blade was gone, her armor dull and cracked. She turned to him, her expression unreadable, though her eyes no longer burned with their otherworldly fire. "You're alive," Elias said, his voice hoarse. She nodded slowly. "As are you." "What happened?" She stepped closer, her movements careful, as if each one required more effort than before. "The temple accepted your sacrifice," she said. "It redirected the signal, severing its connection before it could reach its destination. The prison is intact." Elias exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Relief washed over him, but it was tempered by an ache he couldn't quite place. "And what about you?" he asked, his voice softer now. She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the ground. The temple's energy sustained me. Without it, I am... She trailed off, searching for the right words. Diminished. Elias frowned. You mean you're dying? I am not mortal in the way you are, she replied. But my connection to this place is severed. My purpose is fulfilled. What remains of me is fragile. He stood, swaying slightly before finding his balance. The room spun for a moment, and he reached out to steady himself against the wall. Then we need to get out of here, he said. Find somewhere safe. There is no safe place, she said quietly. Not for what I am. Her words struck him like a blow, but he refused to accept them. That's not true, he said. We'll figure it out. Together. She looked at him, and for the first time, he saw something raw and unguarded in her expression. Doubt, hope, and a flicker of something he couldn't quite name. Before either of them could say more, the chamber trembled. A low rumble echoed through the walls, and the faint glow of the star map began to fade entirely. The temple is collapsing, she said. Its purpose is complete. It will return to the void. Elias's stomach dropped. Then we really need to leave. She shook her head. The way out is gone. We are deep within its core. There is no escape. There has to be, Elias insisted. He scanned the room, his mind racing. The walls were smooth and featureless, the consoles dead. But then his eyes fell on the faint outline of a doorway, barely visible in the dim light. Over there, he said, pointing. The warrior followed his gaze, her expression skeptical but resigned. If there is a chance, we must take it. Together they moved toward the doorway, the floor shifting beneath their feet as the temple continued its slow, deliberate collapse. The passage beyond was narrow and dark, the air growing colder with each step. As they walked, Elias couldn't help but glance at her. She moved with purpose, but her steps were slower now, her strength waning. Why did you let me do it? He asked suddenly. She didn't look at him. You made your choice. To deny you would have been to deny your purpose. My purpose? He echoed, incredulous. She stopped, turning to face him. You are not the same as you were, she said. The temple took something from you, a part of your essence. In return, it gave you a fragment of its power. You are connected to it now, in ways I cannot fully understand. Elias stared at her, the weight of her words settling over him. So what does that mean? For me? It means your journey is not over, she said simply. Before he could respond, the passage opened into a vast, cavernous space. A single beam of light pierced through the darkness, illuminating a strange, crystalline structure in the center. This is it, she said. The heart of the temple. Elias approached cautiously, the crystal shimmering faintly as he drew near. It pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light like a heartbeat. What do we do now? He asked. She placed a hand on the crystal, her expression somber. We end this. The crystal flared, light flooding the chamber. Elias shielded his eyes, but the light was warm, almost comforting. He felt a surge of energy, a connection to something vast and ancient. When the light faded, the crystal was gone, and the tremors had stopped. The temple was silent once more. The warrior stepped back, her movements unsteady. It is done, she said. Elias turned to her, his chest tight. What about you? She smiled faintly, a rare, fleeting expression. My time is over, but yours has just begun. Before he could protest, she placed a hand on his shoulder, her grip firm but gentle. Remember what you have seen here, she said. Carry it with you, and when the time comes, you will know what to do. And then, like the crystal, she was gone. Elias stood alone in the empty chamber, the weight of the temple's silence pressing down on him. He felt hollow, yet strangely at peace. When he finally found his way back to the surface, the ruins were quiet, the stars above unchanging. The weight of what had happened lingered, but so did her final words. His journey wasn't over, and as he stared up at the night sky, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The air on Ashbrink was a rasping predator. Each breath was a fight, each exhalation stolen by the thin, arid atmosphere that whispered across the jagged landscape. The sky stretched overhead, a dome of endless ashen gray, its star, a dim ember, bleeding feeble light onto a world long abandoned by fortune. Nothing stirred but the wind, dragging a mournful howl through jagged black crags. Rhaenyra moved with measured agony, her silhouette a flicker of defiance against the unforgiving plain. Her armor, once gleaming with the burnished pride of her station, now hung on her like a shattered carapace. Splintered plating exposed lavender-hued flesh, streaked with her own blood. Each step was calculated, not in speed but in survival, her senses finely tuned to the smallest shift in sound or shadow. A predator knew when it was hunted. Her assailants had vanished into the planet's vast horizons, but Rhaenyra knew better than to believe she was safe. They would circle back, like carrion vultures once her strength gave out. The broken shard of her weapon, a curved blade with alien glyphs etched along its length, was clutched in her gauntleted hand, useless but comforting. It was a symbol more than a tool now, a tether to her identity, a reminder of who she had been before everything unraveled. The horizon blurred as the winds kicked up. A wall of grit swept across the plain, forcing her to drop to one knee, head bowed against the storm. In the muted howl, fragments of memory clawed their way to the forefront of her mind. The ambush, the burning wreck of her ship, the cold precision of her enemy's strike. They had known her weaknesses too well. Who had sold her out? The question gnawed at her, more potent than the pain of her wounds. In her line of work, betrayal was a constant companion, yet this one cut deeper. It wasn't just that they had wanted her dead. It was the ruthlessness, the certainty with which they had dismantled every layer of protection she had built around herself. It suggested more than vengeance. It suggested fear. Her name carried weight across the galaxy. To some she was a hired blade, the silent executor of high-stakes conflicts. To others, she was a myth, a shadow whispered in corridors where power exchanged hands. The Talon, they called her, for her precision in combat and her refusal to leave survivors. Few dared to cross her, and fewer still survived the attempt. Yet here she was, bleeding and broken, struggling to remain upright as Ashbrink tested her resolve. The storm passed as suddenly as it had risen, leaving the world eerily silent once more. Rhaenyra pushed herself upright, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Somewhere in the distance, a sound reached her, soft at first, then steadily growing. A mechanical hum. Instinctively she crouched, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon. The sound grew louder, resolving into the sputtering whine of an outdated skimmer engine. A dark shape crested the horizon, wobbling unsteadily as it approached. Her first thought was that her hunters had returned. But no. This vehicle was far too rudimentary, a patchwork of mismatched panels and crude modifications. Whoever piloted it was either desperate or insane to venture this far into Ashbrink's desolation. The skimmer slowed as it neared, its pilot clearly spotting her. For the first time in hours, Rhaenyra's body tensed with purpose. Her grip tightened on the broken blade, her legs shifting into a low defensive stance. If this was an opportunistic scavenger, she would ensure they regretted their curiosity. The vehicle came to a halt a dozen paces away, its engine sputtering before falling silent. The pilot dismounted, a human male, his frame wrapped in a patchwork jacket too thin for the harsh climate. His face was obscured by a dusty rebreather mask, but his posture was cautious, not aggressive. He raised his hand slightly, a universal gesture of non-threat. "Easy," he called out, his voice muffled but calm. "I'm not here to hurt you." Rhaenyra didn't lower her blade. Her eyes narrowed, studying him. The human was unarmed, or at least appeared to be. His skimmer bore no markings of allegiance, no sign that he was part of the forces that had pursued her. Yet his presence here was too coincidental. "Who sent you?" Her voice was hoarse but sharp, laced with authority. No one, he replied, taking a cautious step closer. He pulled the mask down, revealing a pale, weathered face with eyes that flickered between wariness and curiosity. I'm just a salvager. Saw you out here and thought, turn back. The words were a snarl, her blade lifting slightly. The human hesitated, glancing at her bloodied form and shattered armor. You're injured, he said finally. You won't last long out here without help. Rhaenyra's laugh was bitter, almost feral. Do I look like someone who needs your help? You look like someone who doesn't have a choice, he countered. For a moment, silence stretched between them, taut as a drawn wire. Rhaenyra's instincts screamed at her to end the encounter here, to eliminate the unknown variable and move on. Yet her body betrayed her, trembling with exhaustion. The human seemed to sense her hesitation. Slowly, he stepped back toward his skimmer. I've got a medkit and some supplies, he offered, his tone careful but firm. You can take them and send me on my way, or what? She snapped. Or you can trust me enough to get you somewhere safe. The word trust hit her like a blow. It was an alien concept, one she had long since abandoned. Yet as her legs wavered and the black edges of unconsciousness crept into her vision, she realized she had no other options. Rhaenyra lowered the blade. It wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Try anything, she rasped, and I'll kill you. The human nodded, his expression unreadable. Fair enough. As he moved to support her, Rhaenyra allowed herself one fleeting thought. Who are you, human, and why would you risk everything for a stranger? She would find out soon enough. The shelter was a patchwork of salvaged parts and ingenuity, nestled against the base of a craggy outcrop that shielded it from the ever-present wind. The dome of energy shielding crackled faintly, a muted barrier between its occupants and the inhospitable wasteland outside. Inside, the space was cramped, functional, and devoid of any warmth beyond necessity, a reflection of its owner. Rhaenyra sat stiffly on a crate, her battered form dwarfed by the alien elegance of her physiology. Her height forced her to hunch beneath the low ceiling, and her presence filled the space with an intensity that made even the humming machines feel subdued. Despite the human's efforts, pain radiated through her body in sharp bursts, each one a reminder of her vulnerability. Across the room, the human worked quietly at a makeshift table, his back to her. His hands moved deftly, sorting through supplies and tinkering with a small device that emitted occasional sparks. His skimmer had barely made it back to this refuge, its ancient engine coughing out acrid smoke as it limped into place. You've done this before, Rhaenyra said finally, her voice cutting through the thick silence. The human glanced over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. What? Fixed things? Saved people. The words came out sharper than she intended, an accusation more than a question. He shrugged, turning back to his work. Not people like you. Rhaenyra's eyes narrowed. You should have left me out there. You still can. Aiden, she had gleaned his name from the muttered curses he'd aimed at his skimmer, paused, the device in his hands clinking softly against the table. He didn't turn around. I didn't leave you, and you didn't stop me, so here we are. The simplicity of his reply stung. Rhaenyra's fingers tightened around the tattered edge of her cloak, the gesture reflexive. Her mind churned with questions, each more pressing than the last. Who was this man? This scavenger with his rusting machines and sharp, unyielding gaze? And what had compelled him to take such a risk? Why? She demanded, the word low and edged. Aiden exhaled, the sound heavy with something unspoken. Finally, he set the device down and turned to face her. His features were plain, weathered, but his eyes held a quiet intensity. You looked like you needed help. Rhaenyra laughed, though the motion sent a jolt of pain through her ribs. A pitiful excuse. You risked your life for what? Some misplaced sense of morality? He crossed his arms, his expression hardening. Maybe. Or maybe I've spent enough time on this rock to know what it's like to be left for dead. The word struck her like a blow, though she refused to show it. Aiden turned away, the conversation seemingly closed, but the silence that followed was heavier than before. Hours passed, marked only by the faint hum of the shelter's systems and the occasional clatter of tools. Rhaenyra observed Aiden with quiet intensity, her mind dissecting every movement, every choice. His actions were deliberate, efficient, and lacked the selfishness she expected. It unsettled her more than she cared to admit. When the lights dimmed, signaling the artificial night cycle, Aiden finally spoke again. "You should rest." "I'll rest when I'm dead," she replied coldly. "Suit yourself," he said, settling into a corner with a tattered blanket. But rest did not come. The sharp clang of metal jolted Rhaenyra awake. Her body tensed, her hand instinctively reaching for the shattered blade that never left her side. The shelter was plunged into darkness, the hum of the shield replaced by an unnatural silence. Aiden was already moving, his figure a blur as he grabbed a tool that could pass as a weapon. "Power's down," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "No," Rhaenyra said, rising despite the protests of her injuries. "They've found me." As if on cue, the first explosion rocked the shelter, its force rattling the walls and sending sparks cascading from the ceiling. Aiden cursed, lunging toward a console that sputtered uselessly. "How many?" he asked, his voice tight but steady. "Does it matter?" Rhaenyra growled, her instincts taking over. She scanned the room for anything resembling a weapon. Her fingers brushed against a jagged metal rod, and she gripped it tightly. The second blast tore through the outer wall, shredding the barrier and exposing them to the howling winds. Rhaenyra moved with a speed that belied her injuries, grabbing Aiden by the arm and dragging him away from the collapsing section. Through the breach, shadowy figures emerged, their forms distorted by the swirling dust. Their movements were methodical, their weapons gleaming with an unnatural light. Rhaenyra's pulse quickened. These weren't common mercenaries, they were hunters, elite and precise. "We can't fight them," Aiden said, his voice breaking through her thoughts. "Then we run," Rhaenyra snapped. She shoved him toward the skimmer, which sat in the corner, partially disassembled. Aiden hesitated, his gaze darting between her and the advancing figures. "It's not ready." "Make it ready." Aiden's jaw tightened, but he obeyed, diving into the wreckage with frantic determination. Rhaenyra turned to face the attackers, her battered frame straightening as she gripped the metal rod like a lifeline. The first hunter stepped through the breach, its weapon raised. Rhaenyra moved on instinct, her body a blur of motion as she lunged forward. The improvised weapon clanged against the hunter's armor, but the blow was enough to stagger it. She followed up with a savage strike to its exposed joint, dropping it to the ground. Behind her, the skimmer roared to life, its engine sputtering but functional. "Now!" Aiden shouted. Rhaenyra didn't hesitate. She turned and leaped onto the skimmer, her momentum nearly toppling it. Aiden gunned the engine and the vehicle lurched forward, careening through the breach and into the wasteland beyond. As the hunters gave chase, Rhaenyra glanced back, her mind racing. Who had sent them? And why had they been willing to risk so much to capture her? The questions burned in her mind, unanswered but unavoidable. And as the skimmer sped into the night, Rhaenyra realized that she and Aiden were bound by more than circumstance. They were both running from something far greater than themselves. The skimmer hurtled through the desolate expanse of Ashbrink, its battered engine wailing like a dying beast. The cold wind whipped past them, laden with the scent of scorched earth and metal. Aiden gripped the controls tightly, his knuckles white as he fought to keep the vehicle steady over the uneven terrain. Rhaenyra crouched behind him, her fractured blade clutched tightly in one hand, her sharp eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of pursuit. The hunters had fallen behind, their hulking forms swallowed by the jagged horizon. But Rhaenyra knew better than to believe they were safe. The type of adversary that had tracked her to this forsaken planet did not give up so easily. "Where are we going?" Aiden shouted over the roar of the engine. "Anywhere they aren't," Rhaenyra snapped, though the conviction in her voice wavered. Her body ached with every jolt of the skimmer, her injuries screaming for rest. "That's not a plan," Aiden shot back, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "Then make one," she retorted, her tone colder than the air slicing around them. "Unless you'd prefer to stop and ask them for directions." Aiden gritted his teeth but said nothing. The terrain began to shift beneath them, the flat expanse giving way to a labyrinth of towering stone formations. The skimmer slowed as Aiden navigated the narrow passages, the vehicle's engine echoing eerily off the walls. "We'll lose them in here," he muttered, more to himself than to her. Rhaenyra's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. "If we don't lose ourselves first." The maze of rock seemed endless, each turn indistinguishable from the last. Time blurred as they pressed forward, the oppressive silence amplifying every creak of the skimmer. Finally, the vehicle sputtered to a halt, its engine coughing out a plume of smoke. "Perfect," Rhaenyra muttered, sliding off the skimmer and landing unsteadily. Hayden kicked the side of the vehicle in frustration. "We're lucky it got us this far." "Luck isn't something I rely on." Rhaenyra's voice was sharp, but her gaze softened as she looked around. The towering rocks loomed over them like silent sentinels, their surfaces etched with strange weathered markings. "What is this place?" Aiden asked, his voice hushed. Rhaenyra's brow furrowed as she approached one of the formations. The symbols were faint but familiar, their patterns tugging at a memory buried deep in her mind. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the cold stone. "It's old," she said quietly. "Older than this world, maybe." Aiden frowned, stepping closer. "How do you know that?" She hesitated, the words caught in her throat. Finally, she said, "Because I've seen it before." Before Aiden could press her further, a low hum began to resonate through the air. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew steadily louder, vibrating through the stone and into their bones. "What the hell is that?" Aiden asked, his voice rising with alarm. Rhaenyra didn't answer. Instead, she stepped back from the formation, her gaze locked on the symbols as they began to glow with a faint, otherworldly light. The air grew thick, charged with energy, and the ground beneath them trembled. "Move!" she said sharply, grabbing Aiden by the arm and pulling him away from the rock. The glow intensified, and with a blinding flash, the stone formation split open, revealing a hidden passageway that descended into darkness. "Did you know this was here?" Aiden asked, his voice tinged with awe and fear. "No," Rhaenyra admitted, her expression unreadable. "But we don't have a choice." The passageway was narrow and steep, its walls lined with more of the strange symbols. The glow from the markings cast an eerie light, illuminating their path as they descended deeper into the earth. Aiden carried a small portable light, its beam cutting through the darkness ahead. "Who built this?" he asked, his voice echoing softly. Rhaenyra didn't answer immediately. Her mind raced as she pieced together fragments of knowledge, scraps of information gathered over a lifetime of conflict and survival. "The architects," she said finally. Aiden glanced at her. "The who?" "It's a name," she explained. "A myth, if you believe the scholars. A race older than memory said to have shaped worlds before vanishing without a trace." "And you believe that?" "I believe this is their work," she said, her voice firm. The passageway opened into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness. At the center of the space stood an obelisk, its surface covered in the same glowing symbols. The hum that had guided them here was louder now, emanating from the obelisk and vibrating through the air. "What is this?" Aiden whispered, his eyes wide. Rhaenyra approached the obelisk cautiously, her instincts screaming at her to stay back even as her curiosity drove her forward. She placed a hand on its surface, and the symbols flared to life, their light filling the chamber. In an instant, her mind was flooded with images, fragments of memories not her own. She saw worlds being forged, their surfaces sculpted by unseen hands. She saw armies clashing in the void, their battles tearing through the fabric of reality. and she saw herself, standing amidst the chaos, her blade raised in defiance. With a gasp, she pulled her hand away, her body trembling. "What just happened?" Aiden demanded, his voice panicked. Rhaenyra turned to him, her expression haunted. "This isn't just a relic," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's a key, and they'll stop at nothing to take it." Before Aiden could respond, the chamber shook violently, dust and debris raining down from above. The hunters had found them. Their shadowy forms appeared at the edge of the chamber, their weapons gleaming ominously. Rhaenyra's grip tightened on her blade, her body coiling like a spring. She turned to Aiden, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Stay behind me." Aiden hesitated, his fear plain, but he nodded. The first hunter charged, its massive frame closing the distance in an instant. Rhaenyra met it head-on, her blade flashing in the dim light. The clash of metal on metal echoed through the chamber as she fought with a ferocity that belied her injuries. But even as she held her ground, the knowledge she had gained from the obelisk burned in her mind. The architects, the key, the war that had left scars across the stars, it all pointed to a truth she wasn't ready to face. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for something much larger, something that could reshape the fate of worlds. The chamber quaked with violence, each tremor a resounding call to urgency. Dust rained from the high, unseen ceiling, veiling the glowing obelisk in a fine haze. Rhaenyra moved like a specter, her shattered blade deflecting another strike from the relentless hunters. Sparks burst into the air as steel kissed steel. Her injuries screamed, but she silenced them with sheer will. Behind her, Aiden crouched near the obelisk, his face pale and slick with sweat. His trembling fingers hovered over the console embedded at its base, a latticework of strange symbols and faintly glowing circuits. "It's reacting to you," he shouted, his voice rising above the din of combat. "What do I do?" "Don't touch anything," Rhaenyra barked, her focus never wavering from the advancing foes. Her blade lashed out, driving another hunter back. But for everyone she forced to retreat, another emerged from the shadows, their weapons gleaming with a deadly light. One of the hunters, larger and faster than the rest, lunged at her with a ferocity that made her step back. It struck her blade with such force that the impact numbed her arm. Her footing faltered, and for a moment she was vulnerable. The hunter capitalized, raising a serrated weapon high. Rhaenyra braced herself, gritting her teeth, but the blow never came. A sudden blast of light erupted from the obelisk, and the hunter froze, its form wreathed in tendrils of energy. "What the?" Aiden gasped, shielding his eyes. The energy coiled tighter around the hunter, until it disintegrated into a plume of ash. The light faded, leaving the chamber eerily silent. Rhaenyra turned toward the obelisk, her breath heaving. "What did you do?" "Nothing," Aiden protested, his wide eyes reflecting the soft glow of the symbols. "It reacted to you again, like before." She narrowed her eyes, stepping closer to the ancient structure. The symbols pulsed faintly, each one humming with latent power. She could feel it now, a faint tug in her chest, as though the obelisk was calling to her, pulling her closer. The remaining hunters hesitated, their movements faltering. Rhaenyra seized the opportunity, her voice cutting through the stillness like a blade. "Leave," she commanded, her tone low and venomous. "Tell whoever sent you that this ends here." The hunters exchanged wary glances, their predatory confidence shaken. Slowly they retreated, their forms swallowed by the shadows of the passageway. When they were gone, Aiden sank to the ground, his body trembling with relief. "I can't believe that worked." "It didn't," Rhaenyra said, her voice grim. She turned her attention back to the obelisk. "They'll be back, and next time, they won't hesitate." "Then we have to move," Aiden said, pushing himself to his feet. "We can't stay here." "No," Rhaenyra said, her gaze fixed on the obelisk. "We can't run anymore." Aiden stared at her, his face a mix of disbelief and frustration. "What are you saying? We can't fight them. Not like this." Rhaenyra stepped closer to the obelisk, her fingers brushing its surface. The symbols flared to life once more, and with them came a flood of images, memories of the architects, their vast cities and intricate machines, their power stretching across galaxies. "It's not about fighting," she said softly, her voice tinged with something Aiden couldn't place. Reverence, perhaps, or fear. "It's about understanding." "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his patience fraying. "This obelisk," she said, her hand never leaving its surface, "isn't just a key. It's a repository, a fragment of the architect's knowledge locked away for eons." Aiden frowned. "And that means what exactly?" "It means whoever controls this controls the balance of power in the galaxy," Rhaenyra said, turning to face him. "And right now it's choosing me." The weight of her words settled heavily between them. Aiden ran a hand through his hair, his frustration bubbling over. "Okay, let's say you're right. Let's say this thing really is some ancient artifact with the power to reshape the galaxy. What are you going to do with it? What can you do with it?" Rhaenyra's expression hardened. "I can make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands." "And what about your hands?" Aiden shot back. "You're not exactly the picture of altruism." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't respond. Instead, she turned back to the obelisk, her fingers tracing its symbols as though searching for something. "Do you trust me?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Aiden hesitated. The silence stretched between them, heavy and charged. "I don't know," he admitted. Rhaenyra nodded, as though she had expected his answer. "Then trust this," she said, placing both hands on the obelisk. The chamber trembled once more, and the symbols flared brighter than ever. Aiden stumbled back as a beam of light shot from the obelisk, illuminating the far wall. The light coalesced into a swirling projection, a map of stars, each one pulsing with energy. "What is that?" Aiden asked, his voice tinged with awe. "The Architect's Network," Rhaenyra said, her voice reverent. "A series of obelisks scattered across the galaxy, each one a piece of the puzzle, each one holding the potential to unlock something far greater." "And the hunters?" Aiden asked. "What do they want with it?" "To control it," Rhaenyra said simply. "To wield its power for themselves. And if they succeed—" She trailed off, the unspoken consequences hanging in the air. The ground beneath them shook violently, the tremor snapping Aiden out of his thoughts. "They're coming back," he said, his voice urgent. Rhaenyra turned to him, her expression steely. "Then we make a choice." "What choice?" "To destroy this," she said, gesturing to the obelisk, "or to take the fight to them." Aiden stared at her, his mind racing. The obelisk hummed softly behind her, its light casting long shadows across the chamber. He thought of everything they had endured to reach this point, of the risks they had taken and the lives they had jeopardized. And he thought of the hunters, their cold, unrelenting pursuit. "What's it going to be?" Rhaenyra asked, her voice cutting through his thoughts. For the first time, Aiden saw something in her eyes he hadn't noticed before. Vulnerability. She was asking him to trust her, to stand with her, despite everything that had come before. "I think you already know the answer," he said quietly. Rhaenyra nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Good." As the hunters closed in, the two of them turned to face the obelisk. Together, they prepared to make their stand. The hunters descended like a shadowed tide, their figures moving with inhuman precision as they poured into the chamber. The faint light of the obelisk painted their armored bodies in hues of silver and crimson, the air vibrating with their unified march. Rhaenyra gripped her shattered blade, its weight both familiar and heavy. Beside her, Aiden crouched near the obelisk's console, his trembling fingers hovering over its glowing symbols. "This is madness," he muttered, his voice almost lost in the growing cacophony. "Madness or not," Rhaenyra said, her gaze fixed on the approaching figures. "It's the only choice we have." Aiden glanced at her, his fear plain on his face. Yet something in her tone, steady, unyielding, steadied him. The hunters spread out, forming a half-circle around them. Their leader stepped forward, taller and more imposing than the rest. Its voice, cold and resonant, filled the chamber. "Stand aside," it commanded, its mechanical tone laced with menace. "You do not understand the power you are meddling with." Rhaenyra straightened, meeting its gaze without flinching. "And you do?" The leader tilted its head, as if amused. "Enough to wield it, enough to reshape the galaxy in our image." Rhaenyra's grip on her blade tightened. "I've seen what your kind does with power. You don't shape, you destroy." "Destruction is a necessary precursor to creation," the leader said, "a truth your species has forgotten." "Then remind me," Rhaenyra said, stepping forward. The leader's response was swift, a blur of motion as it lunged at her, its blade arcing toward her head. Rhaenyra met the strike with her own weapon, the clash of metal ringing through the chamber. The battle erupted in a storm of sound and light. Rhaenyra moved with a fluid grace, her broken blade a seamless extension of her will. She fought not with desperation, but with purpose, each strike and parry precise, deliberate. Behind her, Aiden worked frantically at the obelisk's console. The symbols shifted under his touch, their patterns growing more intricate with each passing moment. "I think I can trigger something," he called out, his voice strained. "Trigger what?" Rhaenyra demanded, her attention split between the hunters and him. "I don't know," he admitted, sweat dripping down his face. "But it's better than dying here." Rhaenyra deflected another blow, her body aching from the strain. "Just make it fast." The chamber shook violently as Aiden's hands moved over the console. The obelisk responded with a low hum that built steadily, its light growing brighter. The hunters faltered, their movements slowing as if sensing the shift in energy. "What are you doing?" the leader demanded, its voice sharp. "Taking this out of your hands," Rhaenyra said, driving her blade into the leader's shoulder. The blow staggered it, but its focus remained on the obelisk. "You cannot control it," the leader roared. Rhaenyra's lips curled into a grim smile. "Then neither will you." Aiden cried out as the console flared, the symbols burning brighter than ever. The obelisk emitted a pulse of energy that sent a shockwave through the chamber, throwing everyone to the ground. When the light faded, the hunters were gone. Not destroyed, but banished, dispersed by the obelisk's power. The chamber was silent, save for the faint hum of the obelisk as it powered down. Aiden sat back, his chest heaving. What? What just happened? Rhaenyra rose unsteadily, her blade still in hand. "The obelisk protected itself," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Or maybe it protected us." The silence stretched as they stared at the obelisk. Its light had dimmed, the once glowing symbols now faint and dormant. Rhaenyra stepped closer, her hand brushing its surface. "It's done," she said softly. "The hunters won't come back, not here at least." Aiden frowned. "But what about the others, the rest of the obelisks?" Rhaenyra met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "That's a fight for another day." "And you?" he asked. "What happens now?" She hesitated, the weight of her journey pressing heavily on her. "I've spent my life running," she said finally. "From enemies, from myself. Maybe it's time I stopped." Aiden studied her for a long moment. "You could come back with me," he offered tentatively. "To Earth. It's quieter there." Rhaenyra almost smiled. "Quieter doesn't suit me." As they left the chamber, the desert winds greeted them, carrying the faint scent of ash and renewal. The sky above was vast and unbroken, a tapestry of stars stretching into infinity. Rhaenyra paused, her gaze lingering on the horizon. "Kindness," she said, almost to herself. "What?" Aiden asked, stopping beside her. "You asked me once what I believe in," she said, turning to him. "I didn't have an answer then. But now—" She trailed off, her expression softening. "Kindness, maybe. It's rarer than power. And stronger, too." Aiden smiled, a warmth spreading through him. Then that's a good place to start. Together, they walked into the night, the obelisk's faint hum a distant memory, and the promise of new beginnings carried on the wind.